Our next witness will be Russell Means. Mr. Means, we welcome you here.
He wants us to stay here.
An Oglala Sioux Indian, Russell Means has been an important and vocal leader for over 20 years. Along with Dennis Banks, they co-founded the American Indian movement known as AIM, an influential group representing many American Indians. Mr. Means attracted national attention when he and other AIM members led hundreds of Indians in the 71-day occupation of a town of Wounded Knee in South Dakota. He has spoken or acted for Indian groups all over the world and has recently suffered a combat wound in support of the Mosquito Sumarama Indians of Nicaragua. Mr. Means is a sought-after lecturer, having spoken to numerous major universities over the past 10 years. When not addressing Indian issues, Mr. Means pursues several business interests. Mr. Means, it's a pleasure to have you here. Would you please proceed with your statement, and thank you for waiting, sir.
Mitakuyepi, miye malakota. Maje tahan wakan tiyospaye, hesa lila wakan. Mitakuye ate tasunka witko tiyospaye. Mitakuye ina wanbli zuya tiyospaye. This is a traditional greeting of my people that I am bound to give, albeit it's a short version. What I said in my own language translate into English thusly. Hello, my relatives. I am an Oglala Lakota, and I come from our very sacred holy land, the Black Hills, where Yellow Thunder Village is. My mother is from the War Eagle clan, and my father's family is from the Crazy Horse clan. This greeting is to this day the way all Indians throughout the nation still greet one another, those that still know their culture. This is the only way we present ourselves to one another that is acceptable. We tell you who we are, where we are from, who we are from, our clans, and we do this without ever saying our name. Anything less would be an insult to you and to my people. Senators, my morning prayers to the great mystery always include you and your colleagues in Congress, as well as leaders in all governments. It is an honor to come before you as a spokesman for my people, the American Indians of the United States of America. In these United States of America, this great country of ours, we American Indians, we can be anything we want to be, except American Indians. And that is created by the laws of this nation and condoned by its subsidiaries, the so-called tribal government, and designed for the Indian to fail, to be expendable, to be eliminated. I take you back in your history. After the American Indian hostiles had been subdued and forcibly confined to Indian reservations, it took approximately 30 years, one generation, for us to adjust and become economically viable, contrary to what the anthropologists say and what we even ourselves are taught as Indian people. However, allotments were made smaller, our remaining lands were open to homesteading, and we were forced into reducing our livestock. Nevertheless, we made the adjustment again in less than half the aforementioned time, 15 years, and become economically self-sufficient again. But once again, the American Indian was forced into reducing our livestock. The boss farmer concept was instituted. We were told what, when, where, how much, and how little we could grow. This applied to agriculture and our livestock. Again, we recovered in a time span of approximately 15 years. We were so successful in our third recovery that the American Indians enjoyed the finest of economic times, while the rest of the industrialized world was wallowing in the Great Depression. It was then that President Roosevelt introduced the Howard-Wheeler Act, better known as the Indian Reorganization Act, the IRA, which institutionalized the so-called tribal governments, which are not one of our institutions, and it is still foreign to us this very day. We have yet to recover. 45 years later, the IRA, Indian tribal governments, on their own initiative, began renewed efforts at reestablishing their sovereignty focused on the oldest profession of American Indians. That's gambling. Bingo and other gaming operations has been, without exception, a proven initial success. Failure through mismanagement, politics, or litigation has been less than 15%, showing a better than 85% success rate. The new Indian-sponsored gaming industry on reservations dwarfed success ratios of any and all other non-Indian industries in America. Gaming operations have proven to benefit the revenue gathering of all governments, be they county, state, or Indian reservation. With regulation of bingo and gaming by the Congress, we are experiencing repetition of history. One shouldn't remedy success. The results? The United States government, through Congress, once again intervenes to regulate a proven success in violation of all basic and fundamental rules of economics and totally contrary to all the laws of capitalism. American Indians are human beings. We are supposed to be citizens of the United States of America. We fought in your wars in other countries. Our Navajo Nation code talkers served and saved this nation in World War II. We have the inalienable right to joint venture with whom we choose, as long as we do not harm nor commit fraud upon anyone. There is no piece of evidence anywhere that proves Indians ever conspired with criminal elements to establish bingo. The Bureau of Indian Affairs, the infamous colonial office of the Department of Interior, and the initiator of sleaze in government, has been regulating contracting on Indian reservations since 1824. This fact alone should convince and teach every student of government that regulation of commerce and enterprise does not work. In fact, it only produces the opposite result. Graft and corruption is rampant to the contracting auspices of the BIA and its surrogate tribal government. Indian front contractors bid for and receive government contracts only to proceed to build shoddy, dangerous bridges, buildings, schools, roads, and dams. The Indian is the scapegoat when there is a failure, and is always the one indicted. Contracting on reservations has proven historically to breed and feed corruption within the BIA and now the tribal governments. Within the past 2 years, I personally have attempted to assist 7 Indian reservations located in the Southwest, the Northwest, and the Northern Plains, to no avail. The investors I represented were from various groups interested in establishing banks, resorts, Indian-owned public relation firms, factories, fishing ports, and international trade. I now know that tribal governments do not want economic development unless graft is a major ingredient. The BIA is a major player in land leases being sold by petty bureaucrats for as meager an amount as $40. There is a scandal of monstrous proportions occurring in at least 2 Indian agencies, the BIA's branch of land operations and the branch of realty. I challenge this investigations committee to intricately go into the branches of realty and land operations. The BIA does not enforce its trust responsibility, quite to the contrary. In September of 1987, I moved from the poorest county in America, the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, to the richest area in the country, the Navajo Indian Reservation. There is no difference. I paraphrase the former Secretary of the Department of the Interior, James Watt, if you want to see an example of failed socialism, go to an Indian reservation. The poorest and richest reservations in our nation suffer from identical problems: mismanagement, a bloated patronage system, no checks and balances, and tribal governments' waiver of sovereignty in order to initiate debt. This is not anything new. This is an everyday occurrence in all tribal governments. Problem is leadership. In this case, it is the lack of leadership. Ironically, everyone, including you senators, refer to the allegedly elected tribal officials as leaders. Leaders are supposed to work for a better quality of life for their constituents. It is an insult to my heritage, my ancestors, and my dignity as an Oglala Lakota to have the term used loosely. Many of the tribal officials are honest and sincere men and women who have good hearts. Nevertheless, a vast majority of the tribal officials parasite on the incestuous world of tribal politics. Not as our forefathers, who were the best providers, protectors, defenders, advocators, and friends. The game of who is the most important rules. It's embarrassing. At the turn of the century, American Indians numbered about 230,000, all traditional. With each succeeding generation, we lose our population base and our spirit as once proud peoples. The American Indian statistics of deprivation have remained constant since the end of World War II. All other groups of citizens' fortunes rise and fall with the gross national product, the GNP. The American Indian statistical lines of deprivation remains constant, a straight line. With the blatant genocide of our traditional people, we have less than 50,000 in America today. We are averaging a loss of 1,000 a year since 1900. We are losing a value system as distinct people that sets us apart from the industrialized world. These facts surface in our tribal statistics, and no one attempts to do anything about it except for a few social workers and reservation police. This new statistical horror is women and child abuse. Child sexual abuse is epidemic on Indian reservations, and all you hear are whispers. This abuse can be directly attributable to the schools on the reservations. Education in the BIA, public, the contract, and missionary schools do not teach positive values from non-Indian culture, and in collusion with the BIA, certainly do not allow Indian culture and values to be taught. The fact is, educators continually denigrate American Indian traditional lifestyle as primitive, dirty, and without any redeemable virtues. And the tribal councils condone it. Needless to say, every time the U.S. government has interfered with American Indian lifestyles, it has been proven to be disastrous. In the 1960s, legal services were implemented on Indian reservations. It was a boon for the people. Tribal officials all of a sudden were held accountable. Legal services stepped in, and lo and behold, tribal courts had power to the power of attorney for the people. The result? An edict from Washington, D.C. is handed down, and legal services can no longer represent people against the tribal government, and they can no longer represent class action lawsuits against any government. Presently, legal services are not much more than a mill for divorce lawyer trainees. Congress passed the American Indian Religious Freedom Act in 1978. To date, 6 cases concerning our freedom of religion has reached the Supreme Court. We lost every one of them. We do not win lawsuits. State governments lose. The only time we allegedly win a lawsuit it is in reality the federal government winning out over the sovereign rights of a state. Once again, the American Indians are the pawn. Now, the major factors presenting American Indian people with existing rights to self-determination. American Indians suffer under a system of dual citizenship, that is, U.S. citizenship and tribal citizenship maintained by the BIA. Only Hitler did that. The dual citizenship is a major obstacle in the free exercise of individual and tribal sovereignty. The continuing loss and attrition of existing lands through various federal, state, and local laws and/or regulations is a hindrance. The abridgment of sovereign rights to remaining lands and the arbitrary monetary policies of settlement of these rights whenever they are recognized. Another major factor preventing Indian people from self-determination, subjugation of the American Indian individual to the laws of government-sponsored tribal governments, and the continuing arbitration of the BIA rules and regulations which have the force of law yet are not repealable. Solutions. The American Indian people's right to self-determination is recognized and will be implemented through the following policies. The American Indian individual shall have the right to choose his or her citizenship, and the American Indian nations have the right to choose their level of citizenship and autonomy up to absolute independence. The American Indian will have their just property rights restored, which include rights of easement, access, hunting, fishing, prayer, and water. The BIA will be abolished, with the American Indian tribal members deciding the extent and nature of their governments, if any. Negotiations will be undertaken to exchange otherwise unclaimed and unowned federal property for any and all government obligations to the American Indian nations, and to hold fully liable those responsible for any and all damages which have resulted from the resource development on or near reservation lands, including damages done by careless and inexcusable disposal of uranium mill tailings and other mineral and toxic wastes. I want to thank you, gentlemen, for inviting me here. It's been a high honor, especially since I'm the only one invited here today to testify that doesn't receive money from the federal government. Also, I want to I was introduced as a former founder and leader of the American Indian Movement to the tribal chairwomen that you have here, our former associates of the American Indian Movement back in the days when we were gross militants. And so I just wanted to let you in on that the American Indian Movement is a very proud, continuing part of American Indian society. I thank you.
Mr. Means, thank you. You certainly have left us with many provoking thoughts about the problems facing American Indians today, and you were kind enough and wise enough to also make some suggestions. I think that is what this committee is looking for. We may agree, we may not agree with him, but it is important to have some thought-provoking ideas of where we should go from the standpoint of the relationship between the federal government and the American natives. I do ask you a question. You say one of your recommendations is to have a right to choose citizenship.
Yes, sir.
And I believe you said absolute, if necessary. Does that mean that a forbearance of United States citizenship and to be only a citizen of the particular tribe that you belong to? Is that what you mean by that?
Very definitely. But I want to qualify that with this. The inherent fear of non-Indians concerning Indians and what we're going to do. It's like when 50 of us went into the Black Hills of South Dakota to reestablish a spiritual youth camp. And everyone in South Dakota, including the senator from South Dakota, and the other senator from South Dakota, and the U.S. representative from South Dakota, thought that the entire Sioux Nation was going to invade the Black Hills and chase all the whites back into the sea, or some such nonsense like that. what happened and what happens is you will probably be pleasantly surprised, and I would be pleasantly or unpleasantly disappointed, that probably no Indian nation will renounce their American citizenship. There might be a few individuals, such as myself, that would only choose a citizenship in their own nation. But we should have that right. We do, as you so aptly mentioned in your introductory remarks about the Constitution, especially Article 6, that pertains to Indian people and our treaties.
If that were to come about, where you had that absolute right and you or other Native Americans chose that right to renounce American citizenship, then what relation would that individual have? Would they be an immigrant in the United States when they are off the reservation? What status would they have legally? Have you thought that out, Mr. Means?
Well, that's for us to determine. That's called self-determination.
In other words,
we certainly wouldn't be an immigrant in the United States, being we're the landlords. So it's impossible for that to occur.
I understand your point very well, but the fact is that if someone renounces their citizenship here, they usually take a citizenship in some other country. And,
yes, if you
I suggest
what
you're suggesting is that if somebody did that, they would take a citizenship as a Navajo or a Cherokee or something like that, and then not be a citizen of the United States. Or are you talking about having dual citizenship? Both the rights, the privileges,
we could
and the
have
burdens.
that, such as Americans also have that right, like
Sure.
with Israel or any other nation, Canada, for example. But what I'm also talking about, that if we chose to be citizens, we would be subject to the same laws that the United States. We would have to travel with passports. I have traveled internationally on my own Indian passport, as well as many other Indian people in this nation. It isn't, I don't think, a very major obstacle, but we do have the right of citizenship. Understand that we don't. I know full-blooded my two younger brothers were not enrolled in the Oglala Lakota because of BIA policy, because they were born off the reservation, even though they were born on another reservation. These types of things, it just adds to the regulation and oppression.
Well, that particular one, it troubles me because I don't have a thorough understanding of it, but some of your other suggestions do strike a chord with me, that they ought to be pursued. Settlement of Indian claims and payment for whatever those judgments might be, if there are judgments. I have no other questions. I do thank you, Mr. Means, for being here and being as blunt and straightforward as you were today and historically as you have been. Senator McCain.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's good to see you again.
Thank you, John.
Russell, we have met from time to time in the past years over a variety of issues, including on the subject of your efforts of freedom and independence of some Indians in Central America, which you have been very heroically involved, I might say. In your efforts to establish or assist the economies of several different reservations you mentioned that have all failed, could you cite us a specific example of the unhappy experience that you had in these efforts? In other words, a specific case where you tried to go and have a resort or a hotel or some other economic enterprise established, and what happened, so we can get a better insight into the problems that we have with economic development.
Okay, I can give you many. But the worst case scenario is with the Lummi Indian Nation. Now, I admire the Lummi tribal government because they have historically butted heads with the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the federal government bureaucracy. In fact, they are now immersed in fighting the IRS concerning the IRS attempt to illegally tax their fish. So when I found out through knowledge of individuals on their tribal council that they had a port license. They're the only entity in the Puget Sound area that has a license to build port facilities. Their proposal reaches something like around 30 million, give or take. That's not exact. And so I was talking with one of their administrative workers who was in contact with the chairman and vice chairman of the tribe. He was in charge of the port facilities. I have a business associate out of New Jersey, and he made contact with the Polish government. The Polish government has a joint venture operation with Americans called Amerpol. The Polish government has a fishing fleet of 40 fishing trawlers, those great big huge metal ships in the northern Pacific. They don't have no port. They're looking for a port. So we had the tribal government of Lummis fax their prospectus for their port facilities to my representative, and then he in turn gave it to the Polish government. They were totally impressed, very impressed with the prospectus. Arranged a meeting. A representative from the Polish government, the chairman of the board of Amerpol, the CEO, and the treasurer of Amerpol, and the Polish government's representative from Alaska for the Northern Fishing Fleet of the Pacific, headquartered in Anchorage, Alaska. Those 5 flew into Bellingham, Washington. Before they did so, they faxed their arrival and flight data to the Lummis saying they were arriving, and that night they were arriving about 6 o'clock. Would they have dinner with them at 8 o'clock at the hotel where they were going to stay? And then would they please pick them up at 8 o'clock in the next morning? They would meet for however long it took, and then they would like a tour of the reservation before they left. And these people were coming to talk about joint ventures, private contracting with individual Indian fishermen of the Lummi Indian Nation, making deals with them, and possibly a joint venture in building their port facilities. This $30 million deal that the BIA has approved already. Nobody met him at the airplane, and nobody showed up at 8 o'clock for the dinner. The next morning, my associate calls me from New Jersey. He's got a call from the board chairman of Amerpol saying nobody's there. I look at the time, and in Pacific time, it's 20 minutes after 8. So they're 20 minutes late. So I figure Indian time, you know, what Tom Daschle runs on, Indian time. And so I told him, don't worry, give him another half hour. Give him another half, and nobody showed up. So my associate called the person who we had contact with the Lummi Indian Nation, who was in a meeting. The chairman was fishing. He's a commercial fisherman. He was out fishing, and the vice chairman was in a meeting. The secretaries who answered the phone didn't know anything was going on. Finally, my associate, because it's our company that's getting egg with the egg all over his face, says, "Are you people insane? These people want to talk $30 million in the building of your port facility. Get over there and pick them up." So she does. They come and pick them up. The meeting results in a lackadaisical type meeting that is run-of-the-mill on the reservation that I've been associated with, all the different reservations. At any rate, the result was that the Polish government and its joint venture corporation with American businessmen went away thinking that every Indian in the entire Western Hemisphere fits all the stereotype images that we suffer under. And that was the straw that broke the camel's back and got me out of Indian affairs. And that was just last month.
Let me ask one more question, if I could, please, and that is your proposal for abolishing the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And let me say that I have heard that many occasions, including some of my colleagues here in the Senate and in the House. And in theory, that might be a viable option if we believe, as I think is true in some cases, many cases, that the BIA has been an obstacle rather than a help to Indian development of all kinds. I think a case could be made in that direction. Whether that was intentional or unintentional, I think depends on specific cases. And I think you would agree with me that the vast majority of employees of the Bureau of Indian Affairs are honest, dedicated, hardworking people who are bound by policies and, in some cases, laws by Congress which impede their ability to help Native Americans. But if you do away with the BIA, how do you implement programs particularly for smaller tribes. As you know, we have small tribes with only a few hundred or less tribal members. How do you implement programs and provide assistance to those tribes in an efficient fashion? Now, if it's a large tribe, I would suggest that over time it should be fairly easy if we could get the kind of education level which is critical in training. But with smaller tribes, I think it would be very difficult to, particularly given the eligibility requirements which are laid down by Congress for many of these programs. How do we resolve that part of the problem with dissolving the BIA?
First, I think your conception of the large, I think it's the reverse. It would be easier with the smaller nations. The larger nations are the stumbling blocks, as proven in Indian affairs when they created the National Tribal Chairmen's Association. That was created because the bigger Indian reservations were getting outvoted at NCAI by the smaller ones who had banded together with the urban Indians. And so NTCA was created with the sponsorship of government so that the bigger reservations would have their own voice and their own little world. Philip remembers that in Reno. The smaller reservations, we have our own qualifications. Understand that Indian people, we have no institutions of our own. The schools aren't our institution. Tribal government isn't our institution. So, with all the rhetoric that Indians themselves are guilty of about honoring our elders, nobody does. Those uneducated elders are the ones that were the first tribal governments who used to impeach tribal chairmen for misusing as little as $40 of tribal monies back in the 1930s. Those elders are the ones, and community by community. It isn't for us to say, it's for the Indian people to self-determine. We have the right to fail. If we botch it, all we have to do is look in the mirror. If we succeed, look in the mirror. We have that right, just as everyone else in America has that right. You have the right to fail and you have the right to succeed. And I don't think it's the prerogative of government to put down a list of qualifications for us. I think the most educated people on an Indian reservation have not been to school.